Humans are weird screams. Yes, Third Flap said, slicking back the fur between his sensory horns. We are quite pleased with how well the humans have integrated into our base. There has been no issues with the necessary exclusion? Prince Trill asked. The two of them were flapping around the main pillars of the base, enjoying the afternoon thermals, and Third Flap had decided to give the visiting monarch an impromptu tour of the colony's facilities. The scraggly things that mimicked trees were nothing to inspire the same awe as the deep forests back home. But the sturdy buildings carved into the arid landscape had its own sort of beauty. Not the slightest, Third Flap said with a contented smile. First of all, the humans understand on a very visceral level that they are far too large to fit into the old pre-contact infrastructure. Second, we have been making every effort to involve them virtually. There is a virtual tour available for their three-dimensional imaging system that not only allows them to explore every section of the base one of us can reach, but integrates the live security feeds where that is practicable. Third Flap paused in his description and gave a chuckle. It has even come in practical on some very unexpected levels, he said. A Class 5 vial of hazardous material was misplaced and the humans used the virtual system to help us find it. Ah, yes, Prince Trill said with a slow nod. I read that report. The system they developed using the cleaning drones was quite innovative. I meant to ask you for a personal telling of the story. I would be more than pleased to, Third Flap agreed. The humor alone makes it worth the telling. A colony-threatening virus was almost lost, Prince Trill observed in a dry tone. And you mentioned the humor first? Almost, Third Flap announced with a cheerful chitter of his teeth. Wonderful word, that. Well, as the humans say. From the massive window they were passing came an agonized groan that vibrated them to their horn tips, and Third Flap paused, waiting for the sound to cease before finishing. No one bled, no one died. Time to move on! He was several flaps past the window before he realized that Prince Trill had darted to the frame and was scratching at the control panel. Third Flap circled around and landed beside the visiting prince. He wondered how loudly it was permissible to clear your throat at royalty not currently in the canopy. Prince Trill, Third Flap inquired, why are you using your override codes to open a random office window? Are you deaf? Prince Trill demanded, shooting him a frantic look. I am not, Third Flap said slowly, trying to project calm without seeming condescending. Didn't you hear that scream? Prince Trill demanded as the window slowly began to glide open. Third Flap wrinkled his nose in confusion. I heard a groan, he said. The prince gaped at him a moment in confusion before shaking his head and gesturing into the office building. We need to find out who made that, he insisted. Why? Third Flap asked. The prince only glared at him and took off into the room before the window seemed half wide enough. Third Flap sighed and hopped. The humans inside had a decent sense of humor. He hopped up and followed the monarch. The artificially cool air of the office stung his sensory horns a bit as he paused to trigger the closing setting on the window. Humans, especially ones struggling with data processing at the end of a long day, did not like their micro-environments messed with. Third Flap found a very confused Prince Trill perched on the frame of the overhead lights. The royal was glancing around, presumably looking for the source of what he termed the scream. Third Flap landed beside him and lifted a wing to point at a younger female human working furiously away at one of the mapping stations. Prince Trill glanced at him in perplexity but followed the gesture with his eyes. That is the human who made the sound, Third Flap explained. She is one of our best botanists. Sadly, she ships out at the end of the season. She is finalizing her mapping efforts now. How do you know that it was her? Prince Trill asked. And shouldn't we offer aid? I am fairly certain, Third Flap said, because that was a mapping software groan, and she is the only one using mapping software. Excuse me? Prince Trill asked, gaping at him now. Third Flap sighed and shrugged. I have been managing the base for these humans for nearly 10 local years, he said. Over that time, you learn the basic categories of human sounds of suffering. The sound you heard was some error, either on the human's part or the machine's, that resulted in the loss of a significant quantity of work mapping data. You can tell that, Prince Trill demanded, just from the sound? Third Flap shrugged again. You could confirm if you like, he said, gesturing at the human, but as there is every likelihood she will be ashamed of a personal error." "No, no," Prince Trill assured him. "I can see that she is the most agitated of the humans present, just—" He glanced at Third Flap with something of awe and something of pitying horror in his expression. "That is an impressive skill you have there." "Humans tied to data processing machines are somewhat predictable," he replied with a shrug. "Humans are weird, a little slice." The clear, mineral-poor waters of the mountain stream flowed briskly over Shufflesalong as he worked his way upstream back to base. The local sun had not yet begun to set, and the small invertebrates that claimed the surface he was moving over shone and glittered as they scurried out of his way. The rocks comprising the bed of the stream were rounded and smooth, and often shifted under the double drawing force of his own mass and the pressing of the current calling for all of his now flagging strength. Then, too, the water was cold at this elevation, and it seemed to be sapping his strength faster than he had calculated. "Should we call for a pickup?" his companion asked. Shufflesalong flicked a trailing appendage in consideration, but finally decided in the negative. "We are almost to the eddies," he explained, pointing to the sandy area of the stream bed in front of him. "That should give us enough drift to make it back before we get too cold." His companion signaled his agreement, and they kept on. As Shufflesalong had expected, they were soon swept up into the eddies along the bank. Not only were they no longer fighting the current, the waters warmed as they recirculated in the sunlight, and they were soon swimming comfortably along. Soon enough, the waters began to resound with the thumping of the humans' footsteps, and then the general chaotic sounds of the camp. Shufflesalong spotted the main slide down to the water and happily swarmed up the chute to the level ground of the campsite. The sounds were immediately muffled in the air, but the humans' chattering was now clear and understandable as their shadows passed over the fronds that formed the undulate's travel tunnels. "Has anyone seen our entomologists?" the deep resonating voice of their crew leader called out. "Not as such," a slightly higher-pitched voice called out, "but given how the ferns and shuffling out there, I'd say they are close but cold." Shufflesalong felt a warm glow at the observation. Their human crewmates were as thoughtful and observant a pod as one could wish. Any time a human commented that you looked cold was usually followed by multiple offers to pick you up and share their excess mammalian warmth with you. From the way his companion picked up speed, the thought of a good grab and cuddle was foremost in his gripping appendages, too, after their long, cold swim. The light grew in intensity as they made their way into the thinner fronds of the camp, and then they burst out into the cleared area the humans' massive feet had stomped down. "Got 'em!" came a cheerful shout, and sure enough, two rough hands swept out of nowhere and scooped Shufflesalong off of the ground. "Got any samples to drop, Shuff?" human friend Cookie asked. "The usual cluster," Shufflesalong replied. "Just drop me in the thermal gradient tank. I will sort them after dinner." "Sure thing, Shuff," human friend Cookie agreed. With only a few of those long, never-ending tumbles, the humans called steps, they were at the water tank that was divided into distinct thermal areas. One side, by far the smaller, was kept at the same ambient temperature as the local stream. The other was kept at a nice, comfortable temperature as a sleeping quarters for the undulates on the crew. Shufflesalong shifted, preparatory to dropping his samples into the storage area, but had some difficulty as human friend Cookie was angling his hands oddly, preventing Shufflesalong's usual grip. Shufflesalong was about to politely request human friend Cookie to extend his asymmetrical finger, the one that served humans as a primary gripping appendages with all its useful roughness, when something else odd finally penetrated his cold, addled senses. Human friend Cookie's lights were spiked with bright pain signals. They were small but localized to the retracted digit. Shufflesalong felt a bit closer to the place with a touch of worry and detected the chemical traces of internal fluids, stress hormones, and the artificial taste of bandages. Clearly, whatever was wrong, human friend Cookie had already had it tended to. Shufflesalong made a note to ask about the injury later, and then dropped his samples into the storage area and slipped himself into the warm waters of his tank. Once he was sufficiently warmed, he swam up and eagerly clambered out with the others towards the prepared meals. "What is in our trough tonight?" he asked eagerly of an undulate who had clearly just left the meal. "Spinach slurry," the other replied with delighted tones. But we had spinach slurry yesterday, Shuffles Along protested, and that gave off a completely different chemical profile. It is all in the preparation, the other said. You can ask human friend Cookie about it. There was heat, I think. Just taste it for yourself. Shuffles Along took this good advice and shuffled up to the trough. There was a lot of heat in this meal. The trough was sending up little wisps of steam into the air as human friend Cookie dispensed more of the brilliant green slurry into the trough. The steam was laden with aromatic chemicals that set Shuffles Along's absorbent fibers tingling with anticipation. However, now that Shuffles Along was warm and alert, he could clearly see that human friend Cookie's main gripping appendage was swathed in layers of bandages, and Shuffles Along felt a tremor of slight unease even as he complimented the spinach slurry, which was utterly dissimilar from the subtle and cool meal of yesterday. The bandages on human friend Cookie's hand were unevenly, even asymmetrically applied. This would not have bothered Shuffles Along in the slightest, had he not had to trudge through a long lecture Second Sister had given on how important symmetrical bandage application was to species with circulatory systems, and the more advanced the circulatory system, the greater the need of symmetrical application. As soon as the meal was over, Shuffles Along waved down human friend Cookie and climbed up his leg. Was the meal that good or that bad? Human friend Cookie asked with a laugh. You are injured, Shuffles Along said. He noted with quiet amusement first the look of confusion on human friend Cookie's face, with spread into thoughtful consideration and then understanding. Despite the clear pain signals his injured appendage was sending out clearly, the massive central processing cluster had chosen to ignore the damage signals. Yeah, I sliced my thumb preparing the meal, human friend Cookie admitted. I don't think I got any blood on the spinach, though. While that would be a potential concern, Shuffles Along stated, I was drifting more towards the idea that you have not reported this idea to Second Sister yet. Human friend Cookie burst into a loud laugh at that. Now what makes you think I didn't run right to our medic with this? The human demanded, waving the crude bandage in front of Shuffles Along. Why humans always moved what they wanted you to consider Shuffles Along would never understand. No Shatar medic would have ever applied a bandage that haphazardly, Shuffles Along stated, earning another burst of laughter from human friend Cookie. Fair enough, human friend Cookie agreed. I sliced more than halfway through the end of my thumb. Wasn't paying attention, I guess. Took a chunk of the nail off, but it was still pretty well attached. And that part of us humans does grow back even if it won't reattach, so I just wrapped it up good and kept on. I didn't know any human appendages would just regenerate, Shuffles Along said with surprise. It's just skin and a little gristle, human friend Cookie said with a shrug as Shuffles Along examined the bandaged area with curiosity. Not worth bothering Second Sister. Human friend Cookie, Shuffles Along said, trying to sound more firm than curious. I must insist you report this injury according to protocol. Do you report every time something takes a nick out of your appendages? Human friend Cookie demanded. Would you like to see my daily reports? Shuffles Along asked, raising his lagging appendages up in a challenging gesture in the general direction of human friend Cookie's face. The human hesitated and then heaved a sigh. He turned and began walking towards the medical tent. Waste of time if you ask me, he grumbled. It is protocol, Shuffles Along stated. It's annoying, the human countered as he ducked his massive frame to enter the tent. Hey, sis, got a thing on my thumb for you to record. The medic stood up from her couch to greet them and clicked her mandibles in a comforting sound as they approached. I presume it is the one you bandaged yourself? She asked, her antenna curling in the direction of the bandages. That's the one, he agreed. Please put it under the scanner, she said after examining the bandages. Shuffles Along noted her antenna flick with annoyance at the tangle of mixed natural and synthetic fibers, but she maintained her professionalism. How long ago did the burn occur? She asked. Isn't a burn, human friend Cookie corrected her. Then what? Her voice cut off as the scanner projected a hologram of the human's appendage. Shuffles Along stared in interest. Just as human friend Cookie had said, the end of his appendage had been sliced nearly through and was now only held onto the rest by a thin connection of living tissue and the compression of the bandage. Shuffles Along was calculating how long it would take him to regenerate that mass when the suddenly silent Second Sister leapt to her feet and darted to the door of the tent. She slapped the control surface that sealed the tent and activated the emergency beacon. "Hold up!" Human Friend Cookie called out. "No need to call in the chopper for a little nick." The Shatar medic rotated her triangular head to stare at him. Her frill flushed green with a mix of horror and anger, and her antenna curling and uncurling alertly. "You?" Her standard words broke off into the clicks of her mother language, and she simply snatched up one of the medical marking bands and advanced on Human Friend Cookie. "Hey!" Human Friend Cookie yelped, backing away from the medic. "Not a bed rest tag. It's just a finger. I wouldn't need a bed rest tag even if I'd cut it off clean. Shuff! Back me up here." "I am quit sorry, Human Friend Cookie," Shuffle Sailong said, gently patting his friend's shoulder. "I make it a policy to never quarrel with a medic who outweighs me." Second Sister sprang, wrapped all 4 of her feet around one of Human Friend Cookie's thighs for leverage, which quite effectively unbalanced the giant mammal and used his moment of confusion to secure the medical band around his wrist. "You will wait here until the medical evacuation arrives," she snapped out in standard. "You have nearly severed an entire finger's end off. It is a miracle you didn't bleed to death." But Human Friend Cookie tried to protest, but she cut him off with a wave of her hand. "No," Second Sister snapped. "You are not an undulate or a gathering. You will rest here until I can hand you over to the human medics. The tent is sealed. I keep all of my cutting implements secured to my biocode, and even your impressive strength cannot burst out of the fabric. We will wait here." With that, she stalked over to her couch and began examining the scanner readout intently. The human and the undulate observed her in bemused silence. "I did not realize Second Sister had so much experience with how to effectively manage humans," Shuffle Sailong observed. Human Friend Cookie only snorted and dropped down onto the chair. "Humans are weird creatures of the deep." "Are you absolutely certain this is the best current to follow?" Touches gently asked, as the 2 undulates huddled together in the ventilation shaft of the main boat shed. Beneath them, the rough lapping of the waves against the sand, the clicking of the boats against the docks, and the creaking of the lines was interspersed with soft woofings of mammalian inquisitiveness and the scratching of spines on packing materials. "No," her companion replied with listless ambivalence in his touch. "No, not in the least." "Then why are we doing this?" Touches gently demanded. "Because no one else in the entire farm complex has any better idea," Prods firmly replied, "and something must be done for him." "This is true," Touches gently agreed as the person in question came into the covered area headed for the crates by the edge of the water. "We owe him so much." Her statement faded out as Human Friend Daryl entered the room below them, his eyes on the datapad in his hand and his feet rattling across the drainage grates of the flooring. He was wearing the ranger uniform that was, so far as Tokus gently understood the uses and patterns of clothing, only used by humans on undulate worlds of higher-than-average temperature. Only the broad soles of his feet were fully shielded. These shields were held on with crossing straps that barely reached his ankles. Formed cloth covered the great joints where his lower appendages met his trunk, and this was topped with a wide circular radiation shield. Touches gently thought that there was supposed to be a cloth sheath covering the cage of muscle and bone the humans called a torso, but she had never seen Human Friend Daryl wear one. "It is like a war of tides," Prods firmly stated, grief and no little horror in his touch. Touches gently had to agree. The uniform and how Human Friend Daryl wore it gave them an unusually thorough view of his colors. When he had first come to the algae farms, he had positively glowed with joy and eagerness. Just his presence was enough to boost the moods of everyone around and fill them with delight. The younger podlings had covered beach after beach in their attempt to capture the play of his colors when he was hauling the boats against the fantastic friction of the sand, or lightly tossing the heaviest predator traps into position. Even the time he had nearly died from attempting to eat the captured predators that had looked kinda like jumbo shrimp had been, if not a joyous occasion, at least an entertaining one. His skin had flushed terrifying colors for days afterwards as it had struggled to expel the toxins. Terrifying but beautiful. Then had come the long-haul Shatar freighter with their supplies and messages. Their first oddity had been when the ship had pulled into a low geosynchronous orbit instead of just higher, energy-saving one. Only human friend Daryl had taken that as a warning, stiffening and ever so slightly showing his teeth as his lights were suddenly shot through with dangerous warnings. The skiff had separated, personally delivering their ordered supplies and one particular message. Third grandmother, nearly as tall as human friend Daryl, even in her old age, had escorted out her mate, tiny even by Shatar male standards, but with gently curling antennae and a wealth of wisdom in his old eyes. All this time, human friend Daryl had been growing more quiet, and had been giving off more and more danger pheromones. Talkers Gently had quietly ordered the podlings back to their pools, uncertain what the threat could possibly be, but not willing to ignore the instincts of the galaxy's most advanced super-predator. Third grandfather and walked up to human friend Daryl, and without a word had taken one of the human's hands in his. Third grandmother had, with a Shatar attempt at subtlety, indicated that she wanted to discuss business with the ungulates and had led them some distance off. Either it was supposed to be a polite but meaningless gesture, or third grandmother, with her stubby antenna and lined frill, had no idea what the ungulate's effective hearing range was, because they had all heard third grandfather gently inform human friend Daryl that his second brother had died. Human friend, Daryl's lights had drained from his body as if he had died standing on the beach in that moment. The sands still savored of the intense stress hormones where he had stood, but his face had gone stiff, and as soon as third grandfather had finished giving the message, human friend Daryl and abruptly turned and walked across the sand. The podlings who had witnessed this still whimpered about it. Human friend Daryl had walked like a machine. Like a malfunctioning AI, he had spent half the night stacking and sorting the next season predator traps. A task that was so far down on their priority list that they wouldn't have begun for weeks. The next several weeks had been strange. There was no chance of sending human friend Daryl back to his home pool to mourn with his family. The Shatar ship was headed in the other direction. The farm's own ships were barely rated to take a human to the nearest system. So Touches Gently had determined to help the human mourn as best they could. She had assumed that their many similarities would make this fairly easy. Humans shared grief through touch and loved podlings, but human friend Daryl gently repulsed the mature ungulates and flat-out refused to go near the podlings. "They don't need to deal with this," he stated, gesturing at his exposed skin. Touches Gently reluctantly had to agree. The dead look was gone most of the time. However, what had replaced it was, as Prods firmly had just observed, like a war of the tides. Colors that could only be grief would creep out from his core, only to be pushed by swathes of rage, which would in turn be washed out by sickly guilt, and then all of it spiked through with irritation. It was as if some stringy emotional algae had gotten into human friend Daryl's system and had created putrefying eddies where emotions should flow freely. Humans were supposed to cry in their grief. The physiology books were very clear about that. The intense fight or flight hormones that kept humans alive on a world where the three most cultivated fauna were two apex predators and an herbivore that could and did kill both of them were not meant to linger in the human brain. Cleansing these out was the purpose of shedding that much water, but human friend Daryl had not shed a single tear. This situation could not go on. Touches Gently had researched what could be done, and the suggested remedy seemed not only dangerous, but quite frankly mad. However, it did make sense in a barbaric sort of way, a very human sort of way. So she had put in an order to one of the farms farther north that was experimenting with a more bioactive approach to clearing the algae predators out of the pools. Now here they were, hiding like mischievous podlings as human friend Daryl approached the crate the drone had brought them. The human stopped 2 meters from the crate and tilted his head to get a better angle on the sounds emitting from the crate. "The frack," he muttered. Human friend, Daryl examined the warnings on the exterior of the crate and moved in obvious perplexity to erect the safety fence around the crate before opening the message attached to the top. "My name is Cuddles," human friend Darley read aloud. "I am a poor, helpless little orphan who will have to be put down unless you can adopt me and raise me to be a good genetic backup for the domestication process." Touches Gently was quite proud of the message. She had spent 3 days poring over human psychology texts to make it as appealing as possible. Even now, the sickly war of emotions written across human friend Daryl's skin was being replaced by the faint promise of healthy perplexity. He crouched over the crate and opened it. At first, nothing happened. Then something round and furry, with 4 forward-facing eyes, crept out, and out, and out, and out of the crate. The eyes were deep black and luminous with flecks of silver. The fur was a soft golden brown. The skin was loose and wrinkly. The body was impossibly long. "A baby seal snake?" human friend Daryl demanded in shock. "What are you doing here, little guy?" He glanced at the message again, as if hoping it would tell him something new. Then the seal snake, a very social being, having not a single predator avoidance gene in its body, gave a painful distress cry and humped forward to butt its head against human friend Daryl's leg. Its 4 large eyes sought out the human's 2, and when it had eye contact, it gently rubbed its head against his leg. Human friend Daryl stared down at the creature as if it had stunned him, and almost mechanically reached down to stroke the round head. Somewhere between its origin and completion, the motion failed, however, and pure, clean grief burst over human friend Daryl's skin. His massive lungs gasped for air, and he collapsed into a crouch over the baby seal snake. The creature was startled at first, but immediately began nuzzling the human friend. Daryl wrapped his arms around the impossibly long body and held it to himself tenderly as his body was racked with sobs. "Is this the reaction we were hoping for?" Prods firmly asked. "Close enough for government work, as the humans say," Touches gently said as they began to sneak away.